Hello, my name is Leslie, and I am the host of the Why Not Today podcast. This is a podcast to celebrate people who have been courageous and said, Why not today? I started this podcast in honor of my father, Patrick Kane, who often said, Why not today? I am based in Reston, Virginia, a planned community right outside of Washington, D.C., and thanks for joining us today. And I'm excited about my guest, Dawn Crosson. Is that how you pronounce your last name?
It is.
Okay. And I literally just officially met her on a few days ago. But I've heard of her and kind of seen what she was doing. And it was one of those things I've thought about reaching out to you a gazillion times in the last 6 months, Dawn. And then, life is just busy and somebody shared something. I'm like, you know what? I'm just reaching out. I saw something on social media. And, sometimes those things on social media, they catch you at the right moment.
Yeah.
So reached out, met with you, got to know you, and I'm super excited. So Dawn is publisher, editor, CEO, founder of I don't know all the titles, but you can explain as we go in, the Reston Letter, which is a cool newspaper, like physical touch newspaper that is published in Reston. And since I'm a kid of Reston and grew up in Reston and been here pretty much my entire life, it really interests me and caught my attention because I think it's a super cool idea to share what's going on in Reston. And I know the first issue you came out, one of the things you said is, we liked when we were kids cutting our picture out from our soccer game or, the different things. And I've got boxes of articles cut out from everybody in my family. So I'm excited to have you and kind of share about the Reston Letter and then kind of a little bit, you got some other courage things going on in your life. So Dawn, if you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself a little bit who you are and then a fun fact, and then we'll get into your courage. So I'm excited to have you.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. I've never been on a podcast before.
Oh, wait.
So
Yay.
this
That's your
is
first
exciting.
one.
Yeah. So my name is Dawn. I'm from Idaho, but I have lived in Reston, Virginia for 20 some years. I have 3 boys, so I'm a boy mom. Everything is very loud and smelly at my house. And I'm a teacher. I'm an English teacher, have taught English and journalism over the past few years, I think about 10 years. So I guess a fun fact about myself, I don't know that it's that fun, but I love baseball. So baseball has been a big part of my life since I was little. I used to listen. I have such fond memories of listening to baseball games because we barely ever had a TV growing up. But my dad would be out working in the garage and he'd be tinkering around and he'd turn on the radio and we'd listen to the Mariners as the team that was closest to us. So collected baseball cards. My brothers played baseball. My sister and I played baseball. So baseball is very much a part of my life.
That's awesome. And did you play baseball or softball?
I played softball. Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of fun how it's very much a full circle moment. And I think we talked about this initially when we connected is John Pinkman, who has a baseball academy in Reston. You don't know him, but his son, because I guess your boys played baseball. He is the one that originated the first thought about doing this podcast because he shared.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because he shared something on social media. It was on Nextdoor, which I never go on, and he had a picture of himself with an eye patch on because he'd had some surgery done, eye surgery, and he talked about every time he looks in the mirror, he thought about my dad, and he talked about things my dad had done in the community, but he also said we both always said, "Why not today?" And that was kind of, I remember exactly where I was, and it was actually, it was September of 2020, so 2 years ago. 2021. And I remember exactly where I was sitting when I saw that. I'm like, interesting. So, and here we go, full circle, the baseball.
Yeah.
So let's talk about courage, Dawn. What does courage mean to you?
Oh, well, to me, courage is looking at a decision, maybe action or inaction, I guess, and understanding why you should be afraid, probably being afraid of making this decision, and also so recognizing the risks but recognizing the rewards, and basically choosing to roll the dice and say, I understand what could go wrong, but I understand what could go right, and I want to do that. So I want to
Yeah,
risk that.
that's awesome. And I know you've done several courageous things in your life, kind of burn the boat kind of situations we talked about.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Reston Letter. So what motivated you to do this, start this? Um,
Sure.
because
So
it's a pretty big undertaking, and I don't know if you've done a newspaper before.
it is. Yeah, so I taught journalism when I went to the high school, started teaching at the high school that I'm at now. There was a small journalism class, and it was only online. They only did online publishing. And then it got to be so small that they shut the program down. And then a few years later, my department chair came and she was like, or said something, to everyone, anyone interested in this? And I said, yeah, I am. I did minor in professional writing, and I did an internship at a newspaper in college. I was the opinions editor for the college newspaper. And I'm just a writer. I've done freelance writing, over the years, and I love to write. Um, so I was like, sure, I'll give it a shot. And I was able to get recruit about, I think it took 7 kids to get a class. So
Mhm.
we got 7 kids. And what I saw over those 4 years, we went from 7 kids to, I believe it was 30. The class closed at 30 the last year I was there. But what I saw from that experience, and I learned a ton, but what I saw was the way that the physical copy of the paper brought the students together. They were proud of what they created, because it's a lot of work. And I just made phone calls, did Google searches, and figured it out, because there was nobody whose place I was taking, and there hadn't been a physical paper there for a long time. Anyway, so I saw this camaraderie among and just feeling of accomplishment for having this in your hand. And that was the whole thing too. I didn't want to do something online. I wanted them to hold it, and I wanted them to take it around the school and show off their work. And so the students came together, but then the school community really did too, because the teachers that were being written about and quoted, and the athletes, and the different clubs, and all of these parts of the school came together. And I mean, distribution day, when we were taking the papers around to the school, became a huge deal. I mean, my kids loved to do it. And working together, it takes a lot of coordination to get pictures and just all the articles written. And so it was really an awesome experience.
Yeah,
And
I think everything these days are online. That having
mhm,
that physical thing to touch, I still like if it's online, I'm not going to read it. But if I can, and a lot of times things that are online, I'll print them out so I can read them.
yeah.
Because yeah. And so then how'd you jump from a high school paper to your idea of the Reston Letter? And I know you did some research and cool stuff around that.
Yeah, well, it was actually, and my husband doesn't even remember this, but it was his idea. He said something, and this was last summer. He said something like, "You should do a Reston newspaper," and that was very flippant of him, and he didn't think about it again. But um, I was like, yeah,
Like that seed was planted, kind of like John
yeah,
Hickman in the Why Not Today.
the seed was planted. And I went down and I into on the computer, and I Googled how to start a community newspaper, and like 10 things to do, whatever it was. And started researching things like printers, and just all kinds of things that I've learned along the way. I had to start from scratch. But the thing is, I had the right connections, because I'd been in the community for I think it's 23 years. And 3 kids. So I know, tons of parents and kids from sports teams and different schools, because my kids have been in a couple schools since we moved once. And then, so you just end up with, you're knowing people in all kinds of different circles. And so, the more I thought about it, I was thinking, I think I could actually do this, or, it's worth a shot at least.
Right.
And then, it was like, well, I did get, actually I have a story. So, before I printed, or, actually not before I printed out a mock-up of the newspaper just as test to see what the printer was like, the printer I eventually settled on. And the mock-up explained my vision for the paper, and, my main point was to get advertisers with it, because this was, not doable without advertisers, of course. Right. So I went to I won't disclose the place. I went to a business close by, a bunch of businesses close by. And I got at one specific place, I got, and the gentleman was not rude at all, but he just said, that'll never work. That's not, people don't want that, I've tried it before and it just doesn't work. And so it's like, okay, but every month I bring him a copy. And the other day I walked into his shop and he looked at me and he's like, we need to talk. So yeah. I think we're going to be, doing a story on him, and he might, there will definitely be a relationship there. So that was a rewarding little experience.
That's there. Awesome.
Yeah. Anyway, so another thing I wanted to do was I want it to be free, and I don't want it thrown on yards and on sidewalks. I wanted it in mailboxes. So then I had to do all the research about the postal service and the different mail rates. And then I sat down with a friend of mine who's a realtor, and we knew we couldn't afford to ship to all residences in Reston, at least to start. So we sat down and we tried to pick different routes, in different places, kind of cover Reston, north and south, both equally. And so we picked these routes out, and, so I had to do that, which
so at this point, it's not all Reston yet, is it?
Oh, it's right. It's not, it still isn't. No.
Okay. So you need some advertisers.
I do. It's a little over half. So, okay. And this was another thing that made this more reasonable or doable, I guess, in my mind, was that I didn't need much overhead for this, right? I just needed, the software. I needed to get the LLC. I researched all that stuff, and it, the website and the email and all that. It's, there's not much expense there, and so as long as I could get the monthly advertising, I could print. And ship, and shipping is what's more expensive.
Right. Well, we can talk about trying to get you some advertisers, but I want to go back to the Reston Letter. Like, where'd the name come from? Because I know there's history behind that, which I love.
There is. So I love history, and I wanted the logo to be meaningful, and you can see it up here, sort of. But I looked at the logo and kind of looked at a bunch of old stuff. I went to the Reston Museum,
which a lot of people don't know. There is a Reston Museum,
and it's amazing.
It has all kinds of great things. And there's actually, I think I mentioned the other day, George Mason University has an extensive area of Reston history there too.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And you're right. A lot of people who live in Reston have no idea of this rich history.
That's what I love so much about the Reston Letter, and the message is that, I think you mentioned to me, that somebody that lives at Reston Town Center, and anybody listening that isn't familiar with Reston Town Center is the new part of Reston. Reston's a planned community, but somebody at the Reston Town Center said they learn more about Reston reading your newspaper than they did in how many years they've lived in Reston.
Yeah, he said he picked it up and he read, the whole thing in probably half an hour, 20 minutes, and said he learned more during that time than he had living at Town Center for 5 years.
Yeah. So many
You
valuable
know,
things in it, which I love.
yeah.
So the Reston Letter, that was the original Reston newspaper. I think it was even before I
So
moved.
yeah, so I'm there in the archives, rummaging around. I sat there for hours. I probably really annoyed whoever was there, but it was just fascinating. And I found that there was a newspaper that was published in Reston called the Reston Letter from 63 to 66, 67, something like that. And it was more like a newsletter, and it was when the community was being built. So it was kind of an update on, like the latest building projects and things like that. They had a big thing about the dedication of the town. But yeah, so I looked up all the copyright, information, and the, the decided on the name, told my friend who's a graphic designer, kind of go with the mid-century kind of, lots of triangles, lots of angles. And then I went with the red and blue because of the two high schools, the
Oh my
Herndon
goodness,
and
that's
South
kind of cool.
Lakes.
So, and I
Yeah.
love too what you mentioned is how you're doing this. It's not you by yourself. And you
Mm-mm.
said you've got a lot of students that you're using as interns, a lot of people in the community. And I think we talked about this the other day. The Reston community is very community focused and
Yes.
wants to help. And I know
Yes.
you've had a lot of people. I'll help
Hmm.
promote it. And I'll help you find advertisers. I'm not going to write for you though.
Fantastic.
You know what lane I'll stay in. I'll help you with a podcast if you want to do that, but
Yes, I
stay
mean
in this lane.
yeah, everyone has their thing. Uh,
Exactly.
but yeah, for the first issue, I, kind of convinced some of my friends to write some things for it. And I wrote, an article about a promise to the community is what I called it, that I'll keep this Reston. And anyway, so I started with people I knew, obviously, just writers I knew. And that first issue that came out in January, after it hit, and I print 15,000 copies, after it hit mailboxes, I got so many, like, people are sending me their resumes, they want to meet so they can talk about what they want to write about. And that's just kind of been the way it's gone since I started. I mean, after that January issue, I met, probably 2 days later with a couple, uh, two retired journalists who live here, and just other people who've been here for a long time, and people who are new. For one of the retired journalists, she was moving to the area during COVID and she didn't know anything about it. And so, she's, like I said, retired journalist. So she knows exactly how to go out and find those stories, make those
Right.
contacts, get the press releases and the press kits and all that. So she has learned a ton, and she's been able to write. And I similarly, a gentleman who is a retired journalist as well, started his own newspaper years ago. Like, I mean, just people coming out of the woodwork to
Yeah, and
help.
there's probably so many more. Somebody else that might be a fun connection for you. There's a person, he's a couple years older than me. His name is Tom Jackman, and he writes for the Washington Post.
Mhm.
But I don't know if you ever said, I'm not sure what, I don't think it's sports. I don't remember what he writes, but he writes for the Washington Post and been around for a
Mhm.
long time. But he grew
Mhm.
up here in Reston, went to high school,
Mhm.
went to Herndon, but he might be kind of a
Nice.
fun person.
Yeah.
Actually doing something I heard this morning, they're doing famous people of Reston, Restonians are doing an event the museum's putting on.
Yeah, I saw that.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
which is like the top Jeopardy winner who
Uh-huh.
does water aerobics with his mom. So it's just fun, all the connections.
Yeah, it is.
So yeah, I am excited about helping you promote this because Reston is near and dear to my heart and sharing what's going on in Reston. And I met with somebody this morning, talked all about you and your mission. So we're going to find you advertisers to get to all of Reston.
That
But
would be awesome.
yeah, I mean, it took courage to do this, but when we were talking, I think the bigger courage part, I mean, it took courage to do this, but I think your past really gave you the courage to step out. And as you said, because of your past and medical issues, it's giving you the space to do this. So share,
Mhm.
I love this story of, and this is, I think, a bigger courage. is how you got to Reston from Idaho.
Yeah, so when I was 21, I was in a car accident. It was my senior year of college. Really bad car accident. I was alone on the road. It was early in the morning. I hit a sign. A building finally stopped or came to totaled the car on a telephone pole, and I broke 7 bones. My left every limb except my right arm,
Oh, wow.
and my skull, my like the orbital bones around my one of my eyes. And so I had to drop out of college a semester before I graduated, and I'd been playing softball, and so that part sucked. But mostly I was a semester away from graduating. I just finished my student teaching, and I had to move back in with my parents, and I could do nothing. I could do nothing on
Yeah,
my own.
imagine.
Yeah. And so, I I didn't walk for 6 months. I had several bone graft surgeries and, physical therapy. And I mean, during that time, so many people showed so much kindness and compassion for me, that, you know, I would, I tried to, I try to replicate that whenever I can, because it did mean so much to me. But um,
But you obviously
then
recovered.
I recovered, and um, then a year and a half later, I was about ready to graduate because I did get to go. I went back to college, and I got to minor in professional writing, and that's when I started working at the newspaper. And I wasn't planning to do that, the minor, but I had an extra semester, so I did that. And anyway, a couple weeks before graduation, I was in a car accident again. Pretty much the same thing. I went through a four-way stop and hit a retaining wall this time. And a biker saw me, and I was having a seizure. And so,
But you didn't know that you,
no. And we still don't know why I had the first accident, but we can only assume it was a seizure.
right.
But also I fractured my skull, so I could be having seizures from that. So we don't know. But I did not break bones in that accident. I hurt my back. But mostly, I was then diagnosed with a seizure disorder and put on medication. And so I couldn't drive, and that was a big deal. I was living outside of Boise, Idaho, and looking for a teaching job. And, I could probably get a teaching job there. But I had a friend who lived out in Washington, D.C., and I have aunt and uncle who live in Richmond, and I visited out here. But she was working on the Hill with an Idaho congressman, and she was like, come live with me, and I knew the metro and buses are way more effective here than in Boise, and I know that I could have a good chance of getting a job, better chance where the population is so much
And so
more.
I love the courage component that you bought a one-way ticket.
I bought a one-way
I'm gonna make
ticket.
it work.
I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna buy a one-way ticket. My dad thought I was crazy. He was not a fan. But I was like, well, I'm just gonna do it. So I did it, and I don't think that I thought about it very much, really. I did know that, well, if it doesn't work out, I have family in Richmond. I could go. I'll work it out. It'll work out.
And that's what courage is, I think, just taking one step, and
Mhm.
you don't know what it's going to look like. So did you
Mhm.
move? I know you got a job before you moved here, actually, but did you
I
move to
did.
initially or somewhere
Nope.
else?
I moved to Arlington first, and I was
Okay.
teaching in Alexandria. And then I ended up in Reston a few years later. And I've been here, yeah, ever since. So I've taught
And
off
I
and on.
love, I was going to say, I love how you talked about being in Reston, and because I didn't even know you didn't drive until the end of our conversation, we were talking about this, how Reston can support you
Mhm.
and help you. I mean, there's things close by. You can walk, there's
Mhm.
underpass. But the other thing I love, the courage piece, I don't know if it's a courage piece, but you've had to design your life around your, I don't know if it's considered a
Mhm.
disability, but your
Mhm.
restriction of not being able to drive. But
Yeah.
what I love too is what you said is that you have the time
Right.
on the paper and develop that because you're not driving all over Northern Virginia and being Uber
Mhm.
driver. Your husband,
Yeah.
unfortunately, is of
Yeah.
3 teenage boys,
Yeah.
and
Yep.
so it's opened up. So it's amazing. It's interesting. The courage, something that happened in your life, you've been able to turn lemonade and lemons into lemonade and see the silver lining.
Yeah.
And I think what I love about your story is it gives people hope. And I think that's one thing
Mhm.
I really want this podcast to do is give
Mhm.
people hope that, okay, this happened, but okay,
Yeah.
what can I do with it? What you
Yeah.
can be a victim or a victor and be
Right.
able
Yep.
to shine a light. And I think I love that part of your story as much as the courage just to start the newspaper is
Yeah. It is,
that.
and Reston is just the perfect place to do, yeah, the paths to get around, and it has this kind of a small town-ish feeling. And yeah, I mean, I was telling you this the other day too. What I've learned, I get to know the best parts of people. Like I was telling you this.
That's awesome.
I get to know the parts of the people who will just, it's raining, let me go pick up your kids for you. I had a neighbor once drive me to the emergency room because one of my sons cut his knee open. These times when you feel, I mean, not driving is my least favorite part of my life, and that dependency on others is my least favorite part of my life. But it has shown me sides to people that I wouldn't have seen before. I wouldn't have seen if I didn't need them. And just to
Right.
be able to accept help from others, I think is, it takes a lot. I don't want to be, I don't like being the mom who, can't just go run her kid across town to a friend's house. I don't like that. But I
Maybe
I
the
have
kids,
to.
your kids have their friends over at your house, so you know what's going on with
Yeah, there
teenagers.
you
Is what I've heard is important.
go.
Yeah, and I
Sure.
love how you shared that you get to see the better side. And you probably, because you're riding a bike or you're walking, you have more time to think, and
Mm-hmm.
you're not
Mm-hmm.
like the machine of us being in a car and like,
Mm-hmm.
the horror stories you hear about people
Mm-hmm.
leaving a child in a car, and not
Oh
because they're
my
terrible
gosh.
people, but
Mm-hmm.
because we're so distracted. Like I've driven
Mm-hmm.
places and I'm like, how did I get here? I wasn't even, because you're just
Yeah.
on automatic mode.
Yeah.
So we could talk forever and ever and ever, but I try to keep it concise for
Yeah.
listeners. So how would
Yes.
you encourage somebody else to live their dream and do the thing to say, why not today?
Um, let's see. I know that people usually regret not doing things more than they regret doing things in their life. And,
Oh,
you know, it's a short life. I don't know. I mean, take a chance. You have a dream. Um, you know, go for it. I don't know. I mean, you can come up with as many excuses as possible, and but also surround yourself by people who, are affirming and who will believe in you. I mean, I can't say enough about my husband, and I really couldn't do. I mean, I've written a novel. I've done this newspaper project, and I'm all the while working or teaching full time, and I could never do that without him. Driving the kids all over town, without him, doing the dishes all the time and all
definitely
the
sounds
stuff
like
he
a
does.
partnership. And
Yeah.
I love that you have the support of the community. And so,
Yeah.
buy the one-way ticket.
Yeah, just do it.
What's and that's often what my dad said. What's the worst thing that can happen? And when I
Yeah.
quit my job, it was the same kind of thing. Like if it doesn't
Yeah.
work, get another job. And
Mhm.
you got to try. And I think
Mhm.
that's the thing I really want this podcast to share, and the message to give people hope to try it and to get
Yeah.
involved. And so, if you're listening to this and you don't get the Reston letter and you want it, let us
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you want to be an advertiser, you want to help support, or if you're a writer, which is not me,
Yes.
I'm happy to share my story, and I got lots of, you know, help you with this.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
ways to go. So I always try to share, go back on my podcast and say, okay, what's the connection to my dad? Well, obviously you never met him. But, you know, immediately when you told me your story of your car accident, it was like, oh, that's the connection. So my dad, the night he graduated from high school, got in a car accident and almost died. And that's where he lost sight in one eye. And that's why he's always wore an eye patch. And so that's the logo of the podcast, is an eye patch and a handlebar mustache, because that's how he looked. And that was his logo. But he, you know, he had to do a similar thing to you, like you. He had to pivot. He had to do plan B. And actually at his funeral, my brothers talked about, you know, he always had plan A, B, C. He was a planner, but the plans often went out the window. So he was supposed to play football for USC and didn't happen. And he ended up going to Notre Dame. And that's where he met my mom. And, you know, so all these things wouldn't have happened, and he wouldn't have been on the path. And we probably never would have been arrested, because he was in California.
Yeah.
That, you know, we wouldn't have been sitting here talking. And so there's so many things that, just that one pivotal thing that changes the trajectory of your life completely,
Yeah.
you know, where it's going to take you. And I often go back to, like, okay, what's that one thing or that one person you met that led you to that other thing and whatever. So much cool stuff. And as I said, we could talk forever. And I know when we talked the other day, you were talking about maybe want to do a podcast, and I would happily help you do that. And lots of people I can connect you with for the Reston Letter. But we're going to get some more advertisers, and I know your dream is to do this full time, which, you know, that's so possible. So making a difference. So thank you for your time. So to find you, we'll share all your contact information in the show notes. The Reston Letter, is it online? Can people get an online copy, or is it just physical?
Yeah, we've got, well, I published the PDF version of the paper, so it's not, you can't look up an article. It's not like, you know, blog kind of format, but it's all online, so you can look at it the way that it's laid out in the actual.
Is it the restonletter.com? Is that your website?
The restonletter.com.
And you've got a Facebook and Instagram, I'm assuming, all the stuff.
Yes. Yeah, all of the things. Yep.
Yay. So, well, this has been so much fun. And as I said, we could talk forever and ever and ever. Any closing thoughts on courage or encouragement?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, well, actually, you know what? One thing real quick. One of the questions you had sent to me was, did you ever regret doing it? And my answer is yes, I do sometimes. It's frustrating and it's hard, you know, but that doesn't mean it was wrong, and it doesn't mean it's not worth it. So, you know, it's not always going to be, you know,
sunshine and unicorns and rainbows.
Or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Unicorns and rainbows. But but it is worth it. And, you know, to see people be able to share. And
it was amazing.
And you just never know whose life you're going to touch by something. And that's kind of the motto I live by. So the Why Not Today podcast is, you know, on all the platforms. We have a website. We can get the swag, the t-shirts, the cups, the vinyls, all the fun stuff. So spread the word and encourage somebody else today to say, why not today? So thanks again, Dawn, for being my guest. And
you're welcome. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm excited to see what happens with the Reston Letter.
Me too.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.